Okay, so today we're moving on to Panpsychism, which if you read the cartoon I had up there a moment ago, you might have some idea what it's about. So, structure of the lecture today, we'll talk about Panpsychism briefly first, see where it, how to motivate it, where it fits in. We'll talk about Nagel's argument for Panpsychism, and then just a couple of objections quickly at the end to Panpsychism. So what is Panpsychism? So essentially it's the view that if we're trying to think about the mind and its relation to the physical, that in effect the universe itself, everything is in-minded or ensouled in some way. If we take pan, meaning all, and psych, meaning soul or mind, it just says that everything has a mind. Mind is, in some sense, in everything. So mind is a fundamental and irreducible feature of the universe. It's completely fundamental, and so that's why we may be having difficulty reducing it to something else, because according to the panpsychist, we can't. It's irreducible. It's just a fundamental feature of the world. It's also ubiquitous. It's not just like some things, like human heads or something, when they're attached to bodies and are alive and working, have consciousness. It's that everything has consciousness. Every little particle in the universe is out there, conscious in some sense at least. So there's nothing on this view that lacks mental properties. Okay, so that's roughly what the view is. So we'll flesh it out a little bit more in relation to some of the other views we've looked at, and then we'll look at Nagel's argument for it. So this is William James, brother of the novelist. What was the novelist again? The other James? Henry James, yeah. And William James didn't write fiction. He was an early psychologist and natural philosopher in a way. So he thinks that, I kind of got a long quote from him here, if evolution, he thinks, is to work smoothly, consciousness in some shape must have been present from the very origins of things. So he thinks that every atom in the universe has within it an atom of consciousness, or linked with it. And just as material atoms have formed bodies and brains by massing themselves together, so mental atoms, so these are like small little bits of consciousness. And the same way that small little bits of physicality come together and build up and then make something like a brain, so mental atoms, by an analogous process of aggregation, have fused into those larger consciousnesses, namely the ones we're trying to explain, like consciousnesses of human beings. So that's the view that even an atom here, say, you can point, as the normal science book will, to the proton, the neutron, blah, blah, blah. On this view, the idea is there should be another arrow pointing to the mind, okay, of the atom, the little bit of mindishness of the atom. And so the atom is delighted here to be finally acknowledged. Okay, so relating it to some of the views we've looked at, think about the relation of supervenience, which we've been talking about for a few weeks and going over, I know, in tutorials as well. So this asymmetric covariance relation between the physical and the mental. The idea being, of course, that you don't get any change in the mental level without a change in the physical level, but of course you can get changes in the physical level that don't result in a change at the mental level. That's why it's asymmetric. But the idea here is that this relation is supposed to be such that the physical properties determine the mental properties nonetheless. So even though you can have multiple realizability, you can have two different physical realization bases, and they'll end up giving rise to, or they'll have the asymmetric covariance relation of supervenience with the one mental state. So pain in Martians, pain in humans. It's the one mental state, different physical realization bases. But the idea is that even in that case, the physical properties are determining the mental properties. Okay. So what is it that that determination relation really consists in? Well, we looked, of course, at functional explanation when we looked at functionalism. And the idea here is that in the same way that physical properties of something might determine its being a mousetrap, as long as we can give some functional explanation there, then maybe that's what the determination relation consists in. When it comes to the mind, we've looked at both options. We've looked at the supervenience relation being, the determination relation being one of reduction, and we've looked at it being as one of functional explanation as well. And of course, we've seen that for both views, there's problems with thinking about this relation in terms of reduction. What's the problem? Qualia, phenomenal states. There's problems with thinking about it in terms of functional explanation. What's the problem? Again, it's qualia and phenomenal states. Okay, so it seems like there's a problem with the physicalist views we've looked at in spelling out what the details of this determination relation are supposed to be, such that it will capture everything that we want to capture, including qualitative states and phenomenal states, and in particular in relation to functionalism and the reductive theories that we've looked at. So there is another view, and we're going to put this on the table to see it as one option and then look at panpsychism as yet another option. Another option for this relation is to say that it's one of emergence. It's interesting. Because my wife works in artificial intelligence, I end up listening to quite a few podcasts on the whole field of artificial intelligence and machine learning and so on. And this term keeps on coming up, emergence, emergence, emergence. And people just seem to use it without really knowing what it means or how it's supposed to work. But the idea roughly is that you've got some kind of physical level of organization, and then supervening on that physical organization, you have mental states, including phenomenal states, but they just seem to pop into existence at a certain level. Okay? They just come along like a little free gift, like a Kinder Surprise. Okay? It's just a relation where there's no explanation as such. The explanation is they just pop into existence. Okay, so roughly here, the idea is that there's genuine novelty at some, once you get to a certain level of, say, complex organization, somehow, in a way that's not really explained, consciousness comes into being. And they're trading on the idea that, look, you know, you can think of an automobile, a car, as being more than just the sum of its parts. It seems like when you have all of the parts organized in the right way, then indeed you get something that sort of emerges, namely the higher level functional thing, the car itself. Okay, so the claim in relation to the mental here is that you get that sort of thing just popping into existence somehow when you get the right kind of physical organization. But of course the relation isn't going to be as straightforward as one mere composition that you have for physical parts here. Because they're just physical parts and you compose them in a certain way and you get some other physical thing. But the relation is more mysterious when it comes to the mind because you put together physical parts and then at some level of complexity, just like the genie coming out of the bottle, somehow consciousness pops into being. Okay, so that's another view that somebody can have, especially when they see that the attempt to explain the determination relation that we looked at a moment ago there, that people trying to give functional explanation accounts of it, people trying to give reductive accounts of it, that they're not working well. The person who wants to maintain emergence will come along and say, well, in virtue of their failing, my view is as good as yours, and I'm just going to go with emergence. Now, panpsychism is an alternative to both, say, reductive physicalism and emergence. So instead of trying to reduce the mental to the physical, or to say that somehow, just magically, out of the physical at some level of complex organization, the mental just pops into being, the panpsychist says that, in a way more reasonably, actually, that the mental is present in every single part. It was just there to begin with, so there's no mystery about it popping into being. And we can't give a reductive explanation of it either. So the view might strike somebody as very odd from the beginning. Panpsychism, everything has a mind. Oh my God, that's really weird. But the problem is, when you compare it to the going physicalist accounts, which don't seem to be able to give a proper reductive explanation, and you compare it to the other possible view, which is emergence, panpsychism begins to look less mysterious than the alternatives. Okay, now, this issue here we'll come back to. Why not say that the emergence just results from our epistemic limitations? We'll explain more in a moment with an example what that means. But the idea is, for the moment, emergence is supposed to be a real alternative to all of these other views, reductive physicalism, functionalism, panpsychism. And in that case, it has to be more than epistemic. It has to be more than just some limitation on our part. And we'll look at Conway's Game of Life example in a minute to see how that works.